Today, we're diving into a really fascinating hypothetical. What happens when a government's big plan for a nationwide digital ID runs smack into one of the most powerful prophecies in the Christian faith? We're going to walk through exactly how a devout Christian here in the UK could actually build a legal case against it, arguing it's a form of religious discrimination.
Now, for someone who holds this belief, this isn't just some dusty old text. This passage from Revelation is the absolute core of their objection. It paints a picture of total economic control, all tied to a single mark. So when they hear about a mandatory digital ID, a system you can't live without if you want to buy, sell, or do pretty much anything, the alarm bells don't just ring, they scream. This belief right here is the bedrock of the entire legal challenge.
So that brings us to the million-dollar question, doesn't it? Can a belief that comes from a 2,000-year-old prophecy actually hold up in a modern British court? Well, the answer might surprise you. Turns out, the UK's legal system has some pretty strong protections for freedom of religion, and that's exactly the framework we're about to jump into. Okay, let's get into the legal stuff. A case like this isn't built on emotion or theology alone. No, it would have to be grounded firmly in UK law, using a legal toolkit that's basically designed to stop people from being forced to choose between their faith and their ability to just live their lives. And these are the two pillars of the whole argument. First up, you've got the Equality Act 2010, which flat out makes it illegal to discriminate against someone because of their religion or belief. Then you have the Human Rights Act, and specifically Article 9, which is all about your right to live out your beliefs. These two laws would be the shield against any government policy that forces someone to go against a core part of their faith. Now, this brings us to a really important legal test. A belief doesn't have to be mainstream or even seem rational to everybody else. The courts, thanks to big cases like Ueda versus British Airways, don't really care about whether the belief itself is correct. What they care about is whether it's genuine and deeply held. So the person bringing the case would have to prove how sincere their conviction is, not whether their interpretation of Scripture is the right one. So how you frame the case is absolutely crucial. The main argument wouldn't be that the government is deliberately trying to single out Christians. That's a really high bar to clear. Instead, the claim would be that a mandatory digital ID policy, even though it seems neutral, ends up having a much worse effect on believers with this specific conviction. And in legal terms, that's called indirect discrimination. To win a case for indirect discrimination, you essentially have to clear 3 hurdles. First, you've got to show the belief is legally protected. We've talked about that. Second, you have to prove that the policy puts people who hold that belief at a real disadvantage. And third, you argue that the government just can't justify creating that disadvantage. Let's just quickly break down that first step using the legal criteria. You'd lean heavily on the case of Granger plc v. Nicholson. Is the belief genuinely held? Yes. Is it a belief and not just some casual opinion? Absolutely. Is it serious and important? Well, it deals with eternal salvation, so you bet it is. And finally, is it worthy of respect in a democratic society? A belief based on the core text of the world's largest religion would almost certainly pass that test. And this right here is the crux of the whole thing. The disadvantage is the impossible choice the policy creates. You either accept what you believe is the mark of the beast, which means violating your conscience and everything you stand for, or you refuse and you're essentially cut off from modern life. No bank, no travel, no healthcare. This isn't a small inconvenience, it's total exclusion. Okay, so at this point, the tables turn. The burden of proof actually shifts to the government. They would have to prove that a mandatory, no opt-out digital ID is a proportionate means of achieving a legitimate aim, like, say, national security. The counterargument is simple. Is it really proportionate? Are there really no other, less restrictive ways to achieve the same goal? Could you, for example, just provide a religious opt-out? Right, so we've got the legal theory down pat. But what would it actually look like to bring this case to court? Let's talk about the practical side of things, the evidence you'd use, and what a win could actually mean in the real world. The case would almost certainly be a judicial review in the High Court, where you're challenging the legality of the policy itself. The legal team would probably bring in expert theologians to explain the history and the scriptural basis for the belief. They'd also point to other legal exemptions that already exist, like Sikhs being allowed to wear turbans instead of motorcycle helmets, as proof that the state can and does make room for religious practices. And you'd definitely be citing cases like the gay cake case, which really reinforce the idea that sincere beliefs have to be protected. So, what would you actually be asking the court for? Well, this table lays it out.
Getting a declaration that the policy is unlawful would be a massive symbolic victory. An injunction would stop it from being applied to you personally. But really, the ultimate prize would be a policy modification, forcing the government to write a religious opt-out into the law, creating a way for people to live by their conscience without being shut out of society.
Of course, the government isn't just going to roll over. You can bet they'd mount a pretty tough defense. So, to get the full picture, we have to look at what they'd argue, how that could be countered, and then finally, what the odds of success really are. This slide kind of shows you the courtroom showdown. The government would almost certainly say the ID is vital for national security and efficiency. The rebuttal is right there. Okay, but is it the least restrictive way to do it? Then the government might try to dismiss the belief itself as just apocalyptic paranoia. The counter to that is powerful. The courts aren't here to judge the faith, only its sincerity. And this belief is based on a foundational text for literally billions of Christians around the world. So what are the odds? Well, based on how the courts have been trending, there's actually a moderate chance of success. UK courts have shown they're more and more willing to accommodate sincerely held beliefs, even when they clash with government policy. If the case is framed sharply around indirect discrimination and proportionality, legal experts think a really compelling argument could be made. And that really leaves us with this final massive question. This whole hypothetical case, it isn't just about one belief or one bit of technology. It's about a fundamental tension in our society. As we race forward with new systems for efficiency and security, how do we make sure we're leaving room for deeply held beliefs? Where do we draw that line between progress and protecting a person's individual conscience? That's definitely something for all of us to think about.